Hello and welcome to Procurement 101 from Basics to Best Practices, hosted by the Community Navigator Program. I am Sharon Zavala. I'm one of the Grant Assistance Navigators, and today I am joined also by Crystal Strong and Abby Rhea Hicks, who are also Grant Assistance Navigators. And together we will be presenting different sections of today's training. Today's objective is to equip you with a clear understanding of federal procurement standards and best practices, enabling you to conduct responsible, compliant, and transparent procurement activities that ensure value, fairness, and audit readiness within your projects. Please note that this is a general training, right, based on 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart D. So for the exact text and more detailed information regarding procurement, please refer directly to the relevant section, which is Part 200.317 through Part 200.327. All right, and first we always like to start our sessions with a thought starter. And today it's this one. What is a product or a service you purchased that you feel was the best value for your money? And so do think about a time when you made a purchase, whether it was big or small, that really stood out as a great value. What was the product? What was that service? Why did you feel it was worth the cost? Or perhaps, recall a purchase that didn't quite meet your expectations. Um, think about maybe what could have been done differently. Really take a moment to reflect on any experience where a procurement process felt maybe a little unfair or a bit confusing. How might perhaps clearer standards or transparency have improved that experience? And so we thought this was a good question to ask and maybe think of examples. Consider how responsible procurement practices could have made a difference, right, in ensuring value and ensuring fairness and accountability. And so let's start with the basic question. What is procurement? Procurement is a process of obtaining goods, services, or works from an external source. And this can include buying everything from office supplies and raw materials to perhaps big machinery that you need for your projects. Or contractual services such as construction, external evaluators, things like that. The main goal of procurement is almost the same as when we purchase anything at a store, which is to get the best quality product or service at the best price. And so this involves identifying needs, selecting vendors, ensuring the purchase complies with applicable rules and policies. Uh, it's important to note that procurement begins with federal procurement standards, which sets the foundation for responsible and compliant purchasing practices. And last point for this slide, effective procurement ensures your organization acquires quality goods and services at a fair and reasonable price, and that it follows this fair and transparent process. And so why is procurement so important? Well, this is it. Procurement is critical because of a couple reasons. It's critical because, first of all, it ensures responsible use of federal funds. It's critical because once you have proper procurement practices, it helps avoid conflicts of interest and favoritism. It also promotes transparency, fairness, and competition. When there are good established procurement practices, it protects your organization during audits too. It helps you obtain the best value for your project's needs. it creates sort of an opportunity to systematically and critically reflect on your organization's procurement needs and requirements, as well as to develop a plan to ensure all of those needs are met. And sound procurement is not just about buying. It's about doing so ethically, about doing it responsibly, but all in line with federal standards to, again, maintain trust and maintain compliance. So now that we know why procurement is so important, let's talk a little bit about the legal framework. To start, all procurement activities must comply with federal standards. Specifically, our procurement procedures are governed by 2 CFR Part 200, which is also known as Uniform Guidance. And the CFR, which stands for the Code of Federal Regulations, this is a set of rules and regulations that govern the United States government agencies and the departments. So, to put it simply, think of it like a giant book that outlines the specific rules and regulations for how the government should operate effectively, how it should operate fairly, and but also protecting the public's interests. It's worth noting that these rules and regulations also apply to those organizations. Uh, we have to abide by these. Hispanic Access does. Even if you're receiving federal funding as a subaward through another organization, you are still going to abide by the 2 CFR Part 200. So think of it like a giant recipe book for the government, just as a recipe book tells you how to make a cake. The CFR tells government agencies how to do their jobs, what they're allowed to do, even what they're not allowed to do. Now, the 2 CFR Part 200 Subpart D is a very specific section of the CFR. And we want to highlight this because this section focuses on how nonprofit organizations and government agencies can effectively manage and use federal funds awarded to them for projects or programs. So again, think of it like a giant cookbook for handling government grants. And so procurement is a key component of this section, of this 2 CFR Part 200 Subpart D section, specifically looking at the sections 200.17 through 327. This is where it establishes the minimum standards to ensure that procurement processes are conducted fairly, that they're conducted transparently, responsibly, thereby, of course, safeguarding the integrity of the funding and promoting public trust as well. And so these regulations establish 3 core criteria for procurement. The first one is reasonable, allowable, and allocable. I'll talk a little bit more about these 3 core criteria in the next slide, I believe. But adhering to these standards is essential for maintaining compliance, for avoiding disallowed costs, and ensuring audit readiness. And when you sign the subawards, you actually confirm then that you are aware of federal procurement procedures and commit to complying with them. Now, I did add a small note here. Procurement thresholds were recently changed due to new executive orders that went into effect on October 1st of 2025. However, these changes only apply to awards and grants that have been signed after the effective date. So, for example, if you sign an award prior to October 1st, 2025, these new changes don't directly impact you. But this example, it just highlights the importance, of staying informed about any updates or modifications to the CFR, especially if you are applying for new federal grants or are entering into new agreements. A good way to do this is to maintain a regular contact with your program officer, who can help you stay current, ensure that you're always following the latest laws and regulations. Let's talk a little bit more about the three core criteria for procurement that I just mentioned: reasonable, allowable, and allocable, which again are part of the regulations as per 2 CFR. So first is reasonable, and this means that the cost must reflect what a prudent person would pay under similar circumstances. So for example, basic tools for a site preparation are reasonable. Now, if you're talking about branded or luxury items, then this will require perhaps written justification. Allowable means that costs must be permitted under federal guidelines. So, for example, a big no-no is alcoholic beverages. Those are considered unallowable under federal regulations. Allocable. This means that the cost must be clearly attributable to the project. Any shared cost involved in the project should be appropriately prorated. And so let's move on and talk a little bit about best practices, so written policies and procedures. Your organization should have documented procurement policies that meet federal standards. Additionally, there is an expectation for you as an organization that manages federal funding to have or to develop written standard procurement procedures. And so these procedures ensure the uniform application of policies and practices. And in some cases, this can provide more flexibility, more discretion, such as perhaps raising the micro purchase threshold, in which we'll talk a little bit more in later on in the presentation. But an important best practice is to regularly review and update these policies. Also, develop procedures to verify vendors. So, checking websites, contact references, even evaluating previous projects for quality, for relevance. Also, conducting site visits, performing background checks. These are all very common good practices, good best practices. But again, they're not absolute requirements, but we do recommend that you follow these. And outline standard timelines, such as for requesting or collecting quotes, which can allow you to demonstrate what is called due diligence, even if you don't receive responses, right? And last point here, use checklists, use templates for consistency and audit readiness. So for example, maybe it's a good idea to create a checklist for sole source justifications that prompts you to verify price, prompts you to verify reasonableness, confirm that there are really no other alternatives, and note of any prior performance with your organization.
With this in mind, let's review the 5 different procurement methods and their associated thresholds. The method you choose will depend on the dollar amount involved. It is also important for your organization to know its budget and have a general sense of what you can expect to spend. This helps in selecting the appropriate procurement modality before proceeding with any purchase or contract. So the first method is micro purchases. And micro purchases are the smallest buys. This is usually up to $15,000. However, if your organization has written policy allowing it, this threshold can go up to $50,000. For these small buys, you don't need to go through a formal bidding process. However, you must document that the price you paid is reasonable, meaning it's fair and competitive. Think of buying basic supplies like shovels, gloves, or small plants for community planting events, purchasing trowels or water hoses for volunteers, things like this. Now, the next method is small purchases. So small purchases will range from $15,000 to $350,000. These are bigger than micro purchases, but still below formal bidding thresholds. So for here, it's best practice to get at least 3 quotes from different vendors and ensure that you use the same specifications for each request. Also, important here to keep record, simply explaining why you chose the vendor you did. So maybe because they had the best price, faster delivery, or better quality. It's equally important to document interactions with vendors, including any requests for changes or updates to quotes, whether all vendors were asked for the same information, and if any vendors did not respond or declined to provide a quote, along with the reasons why. These records can help demonstrate that you made the necessary effort in your procurement process, even if you were unable to obtain 3 quotes. So, an example to keep in mind here for small purchases, think of hiring a local landscaper or contractor to prepare a planting site or install trees. This would mean getting quotes from different companies for site preparation or planting services. Now let's continue on to sealed bidding. So what is sealed bidding? Sealed bidding is a procurement process that is used for large purchases that are over $350,000. This means you put out a formal invitation for vendors to submit their best price in a sealed envelope. You pick the lowest responsible and qualified bidder, the one who can do the job and offers a fair price. The scope of the work needs to be very clear so everyone understands exactly what's being bid on. So, an example to consider here is when buying potentially a large batch of trees or big equipment needed for the project, where price is the main factor. Now, let's talk a little bit about competitive proposals, requests for proposals, or RFPs. So, what is a competitive proposal or RFP? This procurement process uh, is also for items over $350,000, but when you want more than just the lowest price. So here you send out a detailed request, which is called a request for proposal or RFP, asking vendors how they would do the work and how much it will cost. You'll evaluate the offers based on both cost and how well they meet your needs. So think of experience, approach, things like this. An example here that would be applicable is for more complex projects, such as hiring someone to run community workshops or educational programs. Now, sole source. Sometimes there's only one company or vendor that can do what you need, and that is what's called a sole source. So you can use this method at any moment for any amount, but only if you have a good reason. So let's say there's an emergency and you don't have time to go through a bidding process. You have extremely specific and justified requirements that only one vendor can fulfill. The agency may be managing the project. Funds have explicitly been pre-approved that for that particular vendor. So remember, this isn't something you do all the time. It has to be well explained and justified through a detailed documentation, which would explain why only this vendor is suitable. It would describe efforts made to find alternatives. It would highlight the vendor's unique qualifications. It would explain any potential negative consequences that could arise from not using a sole source procurement process, if any exist. And it would include price justification and confirm reasonable and allowability and allocability. So, an example here is, let's say only one nursery grows the specific native trees you want, so you have no choice but to buy from them. This would be an example of a sole source procurement. While federal regulations established in the 2 FR Part 200 set thresholds for procurement processes, such as, like we've spoken about, micro purchases, small purchases, and formal bidding, nonprofit subgrantees have the flexibility to establish their own procurement thresholds. So, importantly, here, these thresholds can be set lower than the federal limits to strengthen oversight and ensure compliance with internal processes and policies. This means that your organization can define different thresholds for each procurement process, such as micro purchases, small purchases, or formal methods, and tailored overall to their organization's capacity and oversight needs. However, it's important to note here that all thresholds must be clearly documented in your procurement policies and remain consistent with federal requirements, as well as the terms of the prime award that you received. Now, for setting organizational procurement thresholds, those adjustments can be based on the capacity of the organization. We're going to go over some things to keep in mind as it relates to organizational size, starting on the smaller end and working our way upward for larger organizations. So, looking at the table here, when it comes to or an organization on the smaller end, when you're thinking about a procurement of 500 or less, um, the rationale for this could be limited administrative capacity, quick decision making might be needed, as well as minimal financial risk might be necessary. As far as any actions needed for this, nor formal approval or purchase made directly by the individual would be needed. Now, when looking at $500 to $2,000 here, the risk is slightly increased, and it does require some oversight to prevent misuse. This example would require approval from a trusted staff or volunteer, as well as informal quotes or documentation. Now, when looking at a procurement threshold of over $2,000, this, of course, has a higher financial risk and needs stricter controls to ensure proper use of funds. This example would require formal bidding, multiple quotes, and approval from a board member or committee. Now, moving on to larger organizations that might be more established, looking at a procurement threshold adjustment of 10,000 or less here, there's an already established process with manageable oversight already existing. This example would require formal quotes and approval by senior management. Moving up to $10,000 to $50,000 of a procurement threshold. The rationale here is you would have a larger budget as well as increased oversight being required for this amount. This example would require formal bidding as well as multiple quotes, approval from the board or financial committee. Moving to over $50,000 for a procurement threshold, this would require a substantial oversight as to prevent misuse of funds, as well as a formal request for proposal process, competitive bidding, and approval for the full board. So, some key points to think about here when considering adjusted procurement thresholds. Setting lower thresholds for small organizations makes things simpler and easier to manage since they often have limited staff and resources. So, it helps avoid unnecessary red tape and keeps things straightforward. Now, as organizations grow and handle bigger purchases, gradually increasing the threshold helps them stay efficient without sacrificing important checks and balances. This way, they can get things done smoothly while still maintaining good oversight. Now, for larger amounts, it's important to be extra careful because there's more money at stake, right? That's why bigger purchases usually need stricter processes like getting multiple quotes and having approvals in place within the organization to make sure everything is transparent and reasonable, as well as responsible. So remember that these thresholds aren't one size fits all, as you have seen in the tables here. They can be adjusted to fit your organization's specific needs, funding sources, and comfort level with risk. With these tips in mind, let's continue talking about best practices as it relates to documentation. Proper documentation is key to protecting your organization and ensuring smooth audits. So, for every purchase, you want to think about maintaining the following: written data records of all activities. This includes vendor contacts, responses, quotes, clarifications. You want to maintain cost and price analysis for purchases over $350,000, showing reasonableness. And you want to maintain a comprehensive signed procurement or selection memo before signing any contract with the vendor. So, an example here would be if three nurseries submit quotes for planting trees, you would want to document all quotes and explain why you selected the best one based on price, delivery time, and expertise. We will now continue speaking about best practices as it relates to disclosing and managing conflicts of interest.
So, when you're thinking of procurement, a few best practices are to be transparent. You want to ensure that you are disclosing any real or perceived conflicts, such as personal relationships or past business ties with vendors. You want to be cautious of hiring by convenience. If, for example, using the same contractor or vendor simply because it's familiar. You want to make sure that you document this choice and that it provides the best valuable, is reasonable, and meets federal requirements. For example, if a team member evaluating bids used to work for a vendor under considerations, they should definitely not participate in the selection process. Failure to disclose conflicts can result in disallowed costs or audit issues. Another best practice to include is ensure full and open competition. So you want to promote fair competition by avoiding any restrictive specifications. Do not pre-select any vendors unless this has already been justified. You want to ensure that your criteria is fair, open, and that you encourage diverse participation, including minority, women, veteran-owned and small businesses. And make sure to document these outreach efforts thoroughly. This includes saving emails, saving communication. For example, if you're seeking a contractor to create educational signage for a tree planting site, avoid language like must have worked with our organization before unless this is absolutely necessary and justifiable. Limiting competition without any sort of justification is a compliance red flag and may lead to disallowed costs. Another best practice is monitoring and managing your contracts. Contracts should include a clear scope of work, a defined period of performance. This refers to the specific time frame during which the contract or project activities will take place. It should align with the duration of your funding source, such as your grant. Additionally, it is advisable to avoid automatic renewals to ensure clear accountability and proper management of the project timeline. Additionally, you want to make sure that deliverables are clear in your contract. You want to make sure that payment terms are also in the contract. Your total contract ceiling should be based on reasonable costs. Make sure that you're demonstrating how the contract ceiling is reached. Provide a detailed outline or budget showing how the total cost will be accumulated to reach the contract limit. Be sure to include all relevant components such as taxes, anything else that may be charged, if applicable. You want to document any in-kind or pro bono contributions. This ensures accountability for pro bono commitments. Do not approve invoices without verifying completion. And you want to avoid terms that allow for unexpected or unapproved price increases, costs, or contract extensions. Make sure to keep all records of signed contracts, amendments, detailed invoices, and communication logs. For example, if you hire a videographer to document community tree plantings, ensure that your contract includes delivery dates, video format, and review procedures, and retain all versions submitted. Another best practice is plan in advance. Start procurement early to avoid delays. Align procurement timelines with project activities and seasons. For example, if you're planning a spring tree planting event, initiate contract outreach and material quotes in the fall or winter. Rushing procurement often results in poor documentation, weak vendor relationships, and compliance issues. So now let's take a look and let's practice. Cafecito Sync is a new SEP grantee, and we are just getting started with our project of planning a citywide tree planting event in cualquier lugar, USA. We need your help in determining which procurement method they should follow. So for the project, they need to acquire the following: native tree seedlings for planting across multiple neighborhoods, contractor services to prepare the planting sites, including soil assessment and planting, a consultant to develop a community engagement and outreach plan. I'll leave this on the screen for a few seconds so you can make sure to remember what is needed for the project. So, thinking about this project, what is the best procurement method to buy native tree seedlings? Is it a micro purchase up to $10,000, no quotes needed, just document reasonableness? A sealed bid over $250,000? Publicly solicit bids and awards to lowest responsible bidder? Sole source, buy only from one nursery because they grow the specific native trees you want? Or a request for proposals, an RFP, asking vendors how they will provide the trees and choose based on quality and price. So the correct answer is A, a micro purchase. And you may be asking yourself why. So if the seedling order is small enough, usually under $15,000, a micro purchase is appropriate. You just need to ensure the price is reasonable and to document it. If the total cost is higher, then a small purchase or other method might be needed. The second question: how should you go about selecting a contractor for soil assessment and planning? The first response is micro purchase, buy from the first available contractor. Second is small purchase, get at least 3 quotes and document your choice. Third is sealed bid, do a formal open bidding process for large contracts. Or D, sole source, hire a contractor without competition because they are the only ones available. The correct answer is B, using a small purchase. Make sure that you have at least 2 to 3 quotes and document your choice. For contracts that are between $10,000 and $350,000, getting multiple quotes and documenting your decision helps ensure fairness and transparency. All right, here's our last question. What procurement method makes the most sense for hiring a consultant to develop a community engagement and outreach plan? A, a micro purchase, pay a consultant directly for a small scope of work. B, a small purchase, request quotes from a few consulting firms and select the best based on experience and approach. C, competitive proposal, RFP, invite detailed proposals from multiple organizations, evaluating their experience, ideas, and costs. Or D, sole source, hire a specific consultant without competition because they are the only ones available. The correct answer is C, a competitive proposal, or an RFP, a request for proposals. And the reason why is hiring a consultant to develop a community engagement plan is a specialized and complex service. An RFP will allow you to evaluate proposals based on experience, approach, and cost. However, if the organization issuing the request has a clear understanding of the estimated days of level of effort and the required tasks and can outline these in a detailed scope of work, this process can also be classified as a small purchase. A few useful resources that we can recommend is the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, that has all of the regulations needed for procurement. This procurement training, along with several federal websites who have their procurement trainings listed, which are FEMA, EPA, another great resource to help you stay informed about the latest executive orders and any regulatory changes affecting nonprofits and federal funding is through websites like GrantStation and also through the National Council of Nonprofits. Thank you all for joining us today. We're grateful for the work that you're doing in your communities. And we especially want to acknowledge your participation as a Nuestros Bosques awardee. Your leadership and commitment to community-based conservation truly matters. If you have any procurement questions, need additional support, or would like to learn more, please reach out to Community Navigator at hispanicaccess.org. Thank you again, and we look forward to continuing to support you.